For Professor Derick de Jongh from the University of Pretoria, African leadership, as well as leadership in Africa, are essential prerequisites for the continent to develop its full potential. As director of the Albert Luthuli Centre for Responsible Leadership, he aims at devising an African theory of leadership and supporting political, business, and civil society leaders. At Zeppelin University's Transcultural Leadership Summit 2017, he presented his vision of leadership development.
So thank you very much. Let me fire off. We decided to be very unconventional in our quest to understand leadership in Africa. And we developed a program or did a research that was called Leadership for Africa. Not leadership in Africa or leadership by Africa, but leadership for Africa. Change in Africa is synonymous, and leadership in change is crucial. We experience that every single day. I mean, as recent as yesterday with what's happening in Zimbabwe, there's change. South Africa is about change. It's constant. It's a moving target. So why did we do it? We need to contribute to theory, first of all, and leadership theory in Africa. But we also have to make sure that we contribute to the understanding of leadership of people in top leadership positions, whether it's government, civil society, or business. But more importantly, also to contribute to policy-making issues. Because once you understand leadership in Africa, you'll obviously be able to also influence and contribute to policy and other developmental interventions. And then obviously strengthening the synergy between academia, where we do research on African leadership or leadership in Africa, but also the implications of that, and then obviously ultimately translating that kind of research into what does it mean in terms of training and developing the next generation leaders. What we are interested in is to understand transformational change. We need to understand what does it mean for a country or a continent or a region to undergo significant radical transformation. And if we understand what transformation means and change means, we might be in a position to then backcast and ask the question, but what do we understand and learn about leadership once we've understood change or transformational change? So transformational change and transcultural leadership, one needs to ask the question, what are the connecting points between this? I believe South Africa, the continent, is a very complex system in transition. And I think it allows for a lot of complex adaptive systems and adaptive spaces where you would need emergence and allow for emergence. So if you go into complexity leadership theory, which Professor Mary Ubin talks a lot about, and I think she was at Zeppelin last year or earlier this year, I can't remember, where she spoke about this. So the bottom line is, if you look at transformational change and if you look at transcultural realities, what you find is systems complex systems or complex societies in transition. But I think what's important in Africa is to reclaim socio-cultural resources. The African continent needs to reclaim socio-cultural resources, which I think was suppressed for many years by the colonial impact. And it needs to be reclaimed. I think leadership authenticity on the African continent lies in three clusters: religion, ethnicity, and African values. We need to understand the rich connectivity that exists between these examples of growth and change and societal improvement and transformation and other systems in society, whether it's government systems or whether it's the role of business. We were talking about getting rural banks into a project like that. At the moment, they work on cash, and they've got an annual turnover about $500,000 at the moment. We also see blurring lines between various cultures. That's why the transculturality is so important that Professor Wieland spoke about. There's significant shift in configurations in society, and I don't think we understand that well, and let alone the fact how leadership manifests in such difficult transitions in society. And then I think there's not enough critique of uncritical use of Western theory to leadership in Africa. We have to critique Western theory on leadership in Africa. And I don't want to be over anti-colonialist, but let me tell you, from where I come in our university, we've had severe student activism last year. You might have seen it in South Africa. And most of that was also about decolonizing the curriculum. So we had students burn down campuses because we have to decolonize the curriculum. So if you think about the complexity of this, and this is just a side comment, we have to be very critical of our understanding of the Western theory of leadership. How do you develop leaders? I think, the following aspects we need to bear in mind, at least. We've grappled with the topic around, can you develop somebody to be responsible? Can you develop somebody to be an ethical person? I don't know. There's a lot of work. We've got great experts in this room about that. But what I think we should bear in mind and at least be aware of, if we start contemplating what developing responsible leaders and citizens in Africa would be, I think the following aspects we need to remember, and that is increasingly the issue of relationality and obviously authenticity. When Dr. Agnes answered the question about growth and about development, her answer was so bloody simple, but to the point. It's about food. It's about having money to go to the hospital, to pay for the doctor or the nurse, or to be able to have childbirth in fairly okay conditions where the mother doesn't die or the child doesn't die. That's development. That's the real deal. Let's not be over-theoretical about this. I think solidarity with followers. Followership is a very interesting thing in Africa. Very interesting. It's a phenomenon that requires extensive research. Leading complex processes and the societal relevance of that. Make no mistake, what Dr. Agnes is doing is not a piece of cake, like the ones we had during the break. Actually, that rhymed. It's not simple. It's complex. And once you also bear in mind the societal value of such complex processes, it makes it a very difficult task. You have to bear that in mind if you develop leaders. Collective and social capital, shared meaning of development, dialogue on socio-cultural resources, social change and in search of goodness. These, so I deliberately decided not to give you the ABC of how to develop leaders and Bob's your uncle and we go home and we all live happily ever after. Unfortunately, not as simple as that. We live in a complex world, and I always say it's like the difference between a jazz band and a symphony orchestra. We live in a jazz band world, and we constantly put a symphony orchestra conductor in front of a jazz band. Not going to work. Not going to work. You need to allow for emergence, and you need to allow for some messiness, because a jazz band is messy. It's not perfect. There's no one leader. The percussionist might take the lead, and then the bass guitarist might take the lead later. It's complex. A symphony orchestra is complicated. It's like an aeroplane. It's complicated. Mayonnaise is complex. So Africa is very, very complex. And it's a bit of a jazz band scenario. So a lot of work to be done to understand leadership and leadership development. But again, and I'm going to close with that, and Dr. Agnes is not paying me to say all of these good things about her, but if we just listen to what she said, you can go home and sleep easy tonight, because that's what it's about. Thank you.